channel. Elf Heroes Saga, the final chapter. The moment you've been eagerly waiting for has arrived. The final chapter of our Elf Heroes saga, The Great War, is finally here. In this epic adventure, Ilara and her heroic companions embark on a relentless battle to rekindle the hope of the elves who are languishing under the shadow of darkness. Before diving into the Great War, don't forget to watch the first 2 installments of the Elf Heroes saga. In each chapter, Ilara and her friends embark on new adventures and witness pivotal events that shape the fate of the elves. When Ilara and her friends arrived in the land of the giants, they were horrified by the scene they witnessed. Once powerful and magnificent, the land of the giants had been reduced to ruins by the destructive assault of dark forces. The giants' homes lay in ruins, their fields burned, and most of the giants had been killed by the monsters created by the dark power. The surviving giants lived in despair and fear. The powers they once relied on were useless against the dark forces. Ilara and her friends did their best to help the giants. They treated the wounded, provided food and shelter. As Ilara spoke with the giants, she tried to uncover the plans of the dark power. After seizing control of the land of the giants, the dark power planned to attack the enchanted forest. Ilara and her friends knew they had to act quickly to stop the dark power. In the land of the giants, Ilara and her friends found new allies. Kron, a brave giant warrior, agreed to help Ilara in the fight against the dark power. Guided by Kron, Ilara and her friends began to explore the land of the giants. At every step, they witnessed the destructive impact of the dark power. Ruined towns, burned fields, and forests filled with monsters created by the dark power were just a few of the scenes they encountered. Ilara attempted to gather more information about the dark power by speaking with the giants. They described how the dark power appeared suddenly like a shadow and destroyed everything in its path. No one knew the source or identity of the dark power. After rescuing the land of the giants from the destructive influence of the dark power, Ilara and her friends knew that the only way to defeat it was to gather more information and find new allies. Their first stop on this journey was the wise dwarves who dwelled deep within the enchanted forest. To reach the underground kingdom of the dwarves, Ilara and her friends had to traverse dark forests, climb steep cliffs, and explore dangerous underground tunnels. Along the way, they battled monsters created by the dark power and overcame many hardships. When they finally reached the kingdom of the dwarves, Ilara and her friends were warmly welcomed by the Dwarf King. Ilara explained the threat of the dark power and requested assistance in defeating it. The Dwarf King agreed to help Ilara in the fight against the dark power. They were also provided with special weapons and armor to use in the battle against the dark power. With the information and assistance they received from the dwarves, Ilara and her friends became even more prepared to fight against the dark power. Their next destination on the journey was a magical forest where nature spirits dwelled. After leaving the kingdom of the dwarves, Ilara and her friends set out towards the enchanted forest. Along the way, they continued to battle the monsters created by the dark power. One night, while camping, they were attacked by one of the most terrifying manifestations of the dark power, the Shadow Monster. The Shadow Monster was a terrifying entity born from darkness, capable of changing its form. It moved silently and swiftly, able to hide in the darkness. The monster had one sole purpose: to destroy everything in its path. Ilara and her friends did their best to fight the monster. However, the Shadow Monster was incredibly strong and fast. Ilara stepped in front of Lyra to protect her. The monster pushed Ilara aside and struck Lyra with a deadly blow, Lyra breathed her last breath in Alara's arms. Alara and the other friends were devastated by Lyra's death. Lyra was not only Alara's closest friend, but also the source of joy and morale for the group. Her death was a significant loss for Alara and her friends. After Lyra's death, Alara and her friends mourned their loss. They buried Lyra with a beautiful ceremony and erected a monument in her memory. Lyra's death deeply affected Alara and fueled her determination to fight against the dark power even more. Now, Alara had one sole purpose: to avenge Lyra's death and eradicate the dark power once and for all. Alara and her friends continued to fight against the dark power in honor of Lyra's memory. As they progressed towards the enchanted forest, they were determined to find the source of the dark power and seek a way to defeat it. With each step, the influence of the dark power became even more pronounced. The forest was shrouded in darkness, the trees withered, and the animals had disappeared. In the heart of the enchanted forest, there was a place where nature spirits dwelled. Alara and her friends knew they needed the help of these nature spirits to defeat the dark power. Despite Lyra's death, they were determined to do everything they could to maintain the balance of nature. Upon reaching the place where the nature spirits dwelled, Alara and her friends met Anya, the leader of the nature spirits. Anya explained to Alara and her friends how the dark power was disrupting the balance of nature and threatening all living beings. She agreed to assist Alara in the fight against the dark power. The nature spirits taught Alara the weaknesses of the dark power and special spells they could use to defeat it. They also introduced Alara to the mysterious paths and dangerous creatures of the enchanted forest. With the help of the nature spirits, Alara and her friends tried to locate the source of the dark power. After extensive research, they learned that the dark power was a shadow-like entity that appeared suddenly and destroyed everything in its path. This entity had been trapped in a cave in the depths of the enchanted forest by an ancient curse. Alara and her friends decided to enter the cave to defeat the dark power. They knew it would be a very dangerous task. Guided by Anya, they set out to find the source of the dark power. Along the way, they battled the monsters created by the dark power and showed great courage to preserve the balance of nature. However, Alara's heart still ached with the loss of Lyra. She had vowed to defeat the dark power in memory of her friend. Along this path, many allies would join Alara. Reaching the cave in the depths of the enchanted forest was difficult and dangerous. Therefore, they decided to send an advance party to explore the cave before Alara and her friends. This party consisted of brave warriors from the dwarves, elves, and nature spirits. The advance party successfully entered the cave and located the source of the dark power. Additionally, they devised a plan to secure the entrance and surroundings of the cave. They returned to convey this plan to Alara. Upon receiving the news from the advance party, Alara organized a meeting to gather her allies. During the meeting, Alara explained the threat of the dark power and the upcoming battle in the cave. Impressed by Alara's courage and determination, her allies pledged to join her in the fight against the dark power. After the meeting, the dwarves, elves, giants, nature spirits, and many other allied forces set out to join Alara. Each had their own unique abilities and combat skills. Together, they formed a powerful coalition to resist the dark power. As Alara and her allies advanced towards the cave, the dark power was also on the move. The leader of the dark power gathered his own army to thwart Alara's and her allies' plans. This army consisted of shadow monsters, demons, goblins, and other terrifying creatures. Together, they They stood ready to form an insurmountable obstacle against Elara and her allies. All the forces under Elara's leadership arrived at the entrance of the cave. When Elara and her allies reached the entrance of the cave, where the source of the dark power was hidden, they encountered an attack from the Dark Army. A horde consisting of shadow monsters, demons, goblins, and other terrifying creatures launched an assault to prevent Elara and her allies from entering the cave. The battle was fierce and merciless. Elara and her allies fought to repel the attacks of the Dark Army, using the power of nature and their weapons. The dwarves smashed shadow monsters and goblins with their war axes and hammers. Elves shot demons from afar with their arrows and magic. Giants knocked down the soldiers of the dark power with their clubs. Nature spirits aided Elara and her allies using the power of nature. However, the Dark Army was vast, and Elara and her allies began to struggle. They lost many friends and were wounded. Elara was not willing to give up on avenging Lyra's death and protecting nature. Gathering her last strength, she stepped forward and faced the leader of the Dark Army. The duel between Elara and the leader of the Dark Army was the pivotal moment of the battle. Both possessed great power, and the fight was evenly matched for a long time. Elara attempted to resist the leader of the Dark Army using the spells taught by the nature spirits. Meanwhile, the leader of the Dark Army tried to defeat Elara using shadow monsters and dark magic. During the battle, Elara and the leader of the Dark Army utilized many different powers and abilities. Elara attempted to resist the leader of the Dark Army using a light spell. Meanwhile, the leader of the Dark Army summoned an army of shadow monsters and surrounded Elara. To fend off the attacks of the shadow monsters, Elara used the power of nature. She created a light bird to blind the shadow monsters and conjured a storm to scatter them. The leader of the Dark Army was astonished. He had not anticipated Elara to be this powerful. Elara ordered the troops to gather their courage and continue fighting against the dark power. She herself began to advance towards the source of the dark power, with the troops following her. In the depths of the cave, they saw a platform glowing with dark energy. Upon the platform stood a towering shadow figure. The figure turned to Elara and her allies, speaking with a dark voice. "At last you have come," the figure said. "Have you come to bring an end to the dark power? You strive in vain. The dark power is invincible." Elara challenged the figure. "We will defeat the dark power," she said. "The power of nature is stronger than darkness." The shadow figure roared with anger and lunged towards Elara. Using the power of nature, Elara managed to fend off the shadow figure's attacks. The troops also joined Elara in battling the shadow figure. The battle was long and arduous. Elara and her allies fought against the shadow figure with all their might. The dwarves circled around the shadow figure, attacking it with their war axes and hammers. Elves shot arrows and cast spells from a distance. Giants deflected the figure's blows with their clubs. Nature spirits aided Elara and her allies using the power of nature. However, the shadow figure was incredibly powerful. It remained unaffected by the attacks of Elara and her allies. It wounded many and even killed some. Elara was not willing to give up on avenging Lyra's death and protecting nature. Gathering all her strength, she charged towards the shadow figure. The shadow figure created a wave of dark energy to stop Elara. The wave pushed her back and knocked her to the ground. Elara struggled to get up, but the shadow figure approached her and grabbed her by the foot. As Elara was about to succumb to darkness, she heard Lyra's voice. Lyra encouraged her and urged her to use the power of nature. Elara listened to Lyra's words and broke free from the grip of the shadow figure using the power of nature. She stood up and gathered all her strength to make one final move towards the shadow figure. The shadow figure created a dark shield to stop Alara. However, Alara shattered the shield with a light spell and stabbed the shadow figure through the heart. The shadow figure screamed and collapsed to the ground, turning into a cloud of dark smoke. After the smoke cleared, the cave was illuminated, and the dark power vanished. Alara and her allies had emerged victorious. As they exited the cave, they enjoyed the warmth of the sunlight. They had saved nature, and the dark power was no longer a threat. Alara and her allies were hailed as heroes, and their struggle to preserve the balance of nature and their victory would be remembered forever.